So, today we're going to talk about the natural resources chapter of the county's comprehensive plan. And this is unlike some of the other chapters that you may have talked about previously. In most parts, this chapter is not one that is about designations of use categories to particular areas. So unlike some of the development area plans, for example, it's about policies that apply to the county as a whole. And so that's why the goal here, and this, like the rest of the majority of the plan, was adopted back in 2015. So this is a plan that's been around for a while and is primed to be updated soon. And the overarching goal for this chapter talks about protecting and managing the county's ecosystems and natural resources. And importantly, it talks about both the rural and development areas. There's a tendency to think sometimes, I think, rural areas are for natural resources and development areas are for development. But I think it's a very important point that in Albemarle, we apply a lot of our natural resource protection policies to development areas as well. As much as we want to concentrate development and form truly urban areas in our development areas, we still want to carefully manage and protect our natural resources
Scott,
across the county.
Speak up just a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah. Is that better? Yeah.
Yes, it is.
So again, I was just saying that it's just an important point of the overarching goal for this chapter is that it applies to the county as a whole and not just to the rural areas. So what I'm going to do, especially after getting a little bit of direction from Muriel, is I'm going to go through the entire chapter, but I'm going to skim some of the sections that are simpler or that have not changed very much, and I'm going to focus the time on some of the things that have changed recently, some of the highlights where we've gotten some important things done, and some of the most interesting areas I think that are the real focus areas. Of course, you all are welcome to ask questions about any part of it that's of interest, but rather than just plodding through step by step, I'll try to really focus on the most interesting areas. So there are 8 objectives, each of which has strategies, and quite appropriately for our county's history, objective 1 is about protecting our water resources. This is a very consistent point throughout the county's history. Protecting our water has been a driving force in our land use protection policies for a very long time. And you could argue that was the main driving force behind our rural area protection policies. So objective 1 is about protecting our water for both human healthy ecosystems and of course, as some of you may know, and this is probably a whole separate presentation on its own, but with strategy 1A, this is talking about our existing water protection ordinance. This is a good example. There are a lot of strategies in this chapter that will say continue to. We have policies in place that we've had in place for a long time. We have regulations in place, programs in place that we've had for a long time. And this chapter will say, keep doing what you're doing. For example, the water protection ordinance puts in place policies to protect our watershed and the watershed of the Chesapeake Bay, and adopts portions of the Chesapeake Bay program in Albemarle, even though we're quite a ways upstream. So we've got the watershed protection ordinance, which has erosion and sediment control plan requirements, stream buffer requirements, and I'll talk more about that later in the presentation. Water resource planning, education programs, trying to get funding for water resource management, and 1F is something that has been in here for a long time, is trying to focus the protection of our reservoirs on water supply protection, but recognizing that there is recreational use and that we need to allow some amount of that. Objective 2 is about air quality. I'm going to say very little about this objective, and it's one strategy which was focused on reducing the carbon footprint through alternative forms of transportation, because that relates to our climate action plan that was recently adopted by the board. And that's because that comes up in Objective 8 at the end of my presentation. So I'll just pass by that for now and talk about it in much more detail a little later. Objective 3 is about mineral resources, recognizing that there are mineral resource extraction areas as the more traditional meaning of the word or the term natural resources, literally extractive use of resources in the county, but being careful about the effects of that extractive use. For those of you who aren't familiar with this, we have some areas in the county that have overlay zoning. It's natural resource extraction overlay. These are quarries in the county that are specifically zoned for the removal of large volumes of geological resources, rock, gravel, things like that. These red areas.
Scott, real quick question. I see those, nothing down at Albemarle for soapstone?
No, and I don't know why that is, except to say that maybe when this overlay came into place, those may have been not very active, and they're coming back into activity now.
Right.
I don't really know why that extraction overlay wasn't put in place on those.
If I can comment, living down in near
right.
Albemarle and Schuyler area, Schuyler has the second biggest soapstone seam in the world. And I remember when these extraction zones were discussed back in, I forget whether it was when all of this was being developed before 2015, and the board politics back then was somewhat different. And I remember there was a lot of discussion of these, and in fact, you can call it NIMBY if you want, but there were a lot of people. I mean, soapstone extraction is a very heavy-duty industrial. I mean, it's, extracting stone, and it alters the natural environment. It has impacts on houses miles away, really. I mean, you can hear the machinery operating. Or it used to be you could hear the machinery operating a couple of miles away down here, and I know there was a lot of public outcry, and that's my recollection, that the idea of trying to promote a lot of heavy-duty industry in the rural areas down here, and I think that to a degree constrained people's zeal for promoting soapstone extraction down here. Plus, I mean, the market for all these things has changed. I mean, I remember when I was on a faculty at Northwestern and I had a laboratory and I had a soapstone sink in it, but it had been made years ago. But since then, there's been a shift away from soapstone for lots of uses. So I think there were lots of concerns of different types surrounding promoting sort of a resurgence of soapstone extraction down in southern Albemarle. Although it used to be a gigantic industry 100 years ago down here.
Right. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the ones that you see here on the map, the ones that are still really active, are more like rock and gravel quarries for current use. Of course, there's the one over here by Shadwell, the Luckstone quarry just by the river there.
Scott, we really can't hear you when you talk down.
I'll try to fix this.
Yeah, Scott, there's also a lot of static, at least at my end, and I don't know if that's because of the headset or if everybody needs to go on mute, but there's you've got a lot of white noise covering up your presentation.
I'm sorry about that. That's a new problem that I haven't had before, so I'm not sure what's causing that, but I'll just try to speak up and hopefully I'll get through the noise.
Yeah, I can hear Scott on the phone, by the way, perfectly, so maybe it's something internet.
Apologize for the problem, but I'll just try to speak up and see what happens. I think that's probably enough about that, about Objective 3 for now, unless anybody has any questions. What I do want to move and spend a significant amount of time on is Objective 4. I think this is probably one of the most interesting parts of this chapter. Objective 4 is protect the biological diversity and ecological integrity of the county in both the rural and development areas. This is the one exception to the 2015 adoption date for this chapter. This one objective was actually updated and readopted in 2019. Thanks to years of work put in by the Natural Heritage Committee and to Kim's predecessor in the Natural Resource Manager position, David Hanna, they were able to put together the final set of recommendations, assemble a biodiversity action plan, and really significantly update this chapter, which I really want to point out is an unusual thing for a locality to do. This is the same thing I often say about the Natural Heritage Committee. Most localities, not only in Virginia, but in the United States, don't treat biodiversity in anything more than a fairly surface way, unless they're forced to by having Endangered Species Act management plans pushed on them by the act because of habitat in their locality. If they don't have to do it, they don't. Albemarle is a particularly forward-looking locality in this manner, in this respect. So it's one of the reasons I'm happy to work here, and been very proud of the stuff we've been able to do on this particular topic. So this has been underway for a very long time. The 1995 comprehensive plan first brought up this topic of adopting or calling for the county to develop and adopt a biodiversity action plan. And I could go on for hours about this because I'm so interested in it, but I won't because we don't have the time. I'll just say that starting back in the early 2000s with the work of the biodiversity working group, we started studying, what the issues were, how we could address them, and what we needed to do in the county to protect the important sites we had, to adopt the principles of conservation biology into our comprehensive plan and try to protect what we had better. So over on the left of the screen here is the cover of the Biodiversity Work Group's report, a quick shot of one of the pages of the initial list of important sites. But also in the page here are some illustrations from the comp plan that are just some basic concepts of landscape ecology and conservation science. The idea is here about habitat fragmentation, about connectivity of landscapes and habitats. Strategy 4 here, 4A, now says implement an action plan. That means we finally have one. After all these years, the action plan is in place. In 2018, the committee produced a very detailed action plan based on a lot of local expertise, based on a lot of landscape science and GIS analysis. And so we went from all those years ago, starting in the initial work, to a really detailed, nice plan that led to this chapter being amended last year. And now we have things like ranked forest block habitats of importance in the county. We have conservation focus areas in the plan that are prioritized for conservation work in the county. This, to me, is a huge step forward in the county, going from treating the rural areas and its natural resources as generic policies saying, they're all important wherever they might be, to saying, we now know where the really important places are that we need to protect and tying them down in space. So this is to me, a big achievement in conservation planning and comprehensive planning in the county, and something that I'm really proud that we've been able to achieve. Strategy 4B is related to that, and it talks about using the tools we have and targeting them to specific kinds of landscapes and habitats that we know are important, and saying that the county should take steps to find those and target them for protection. Just another example of acting on that with strategy 4E here, which talks about revising the criteria for our conservation easement programs. And Kim and Jess Goodall, who is the coordinator of our ACE program, which is the program we use to purchase conservation easements on land that's under risk of being developed, are already working on revising the criteria, the selection criteria for that program to better represent land of biodiversity importance. So that kind of land will also be likely to score well in that program and likely to be protected. Our scoring for biodiversity in that program was not all that great. It wasn't particularly refined. It's going to be a lot better now thanks to the work that the Natural Heritage Committee put into clarifying what we have and what we ought to be protected.
Scott?
Yeah.
The ACE program often believed that they wouldn't be able to get farmers and landowners to put their land in conservation easement if they did have stronger criteria. How is that? Has it been in place, and how is that working?
It's not in place yet. Kim and Chess are still working on the new version of the ordinance that would allow them to offer points to the people. And what it really does is it gives people options. If people don't want to take those steps, then they can turn down those points. And then they're taking a risk that maybe somebody else might score better than them. They can score better if they agree, if they say, well, I've got these resources and I can score better by agreeing to take the steps that will protect them.
That seems like a good approach.
Good. I apologize for my assistant here.
If I could comment, many people who own land today in the county, in fact, own it because they want to help provide a place where there is sort of natural resources and natural beauty. And if I think actually the plan notes that in many citizen surveys since the early 90s, really, public schools, adequate policing, and then natural resource protection tend to be 1, 2, and 3 in terms of public concerns. Although this last survey during COVID, I think economic development, which usually was further down, climbed up a bit. But I think protecting natural resources as natural resources, it is a widespread value among the populace right now, which we're very lucky for, I think.
And also, Sally, you're exactly right that was a concern specifically for the ACE program, because it has always been very much designed for working farms and farm families. But that's not our only easement program. We do also have a donated easement program with the Easement Authority. So we've already been implementing biodiversity protection on those donated easements in cases where it seems appropriate. And in that case, there isn't as much concern about the scoring system, whatever. We're doing it by finding properties where people are already interested in doing conservation. They've come to us and we're telling them, look, you've got something really important here that it would be a good thing to protect. Are you willing to go there? And most often they are. So we're pursuing this on multiple fronts. Okay. I should also point out C and D here. So we're talking about doing this on county-owned land. That'll come up later in Objective 8. And parks and green systems in the development areas, which is something Rachel can talk about in more detail if you all have questions about it. All right. Another one that has come up recently was strategy 4G, which is encouraging the use of locally native plants in landscaping to protect and provide habitat for native biodiversity. And one way that the county is trying to lead on this is we are updating our approved plant list for site development plans. So the list that is used for approved landscaping plans for commercial development in the county. And we're updating that list to add more native species, remove invasives, and that's something that was also already underway. And that's this photo here with the little eastern tail of blue on it is actually from a demonstration project that was done at the county office building where some old landscaping was removed and was replaced with some native pollinator-friendly plants at our own parking lot. So it's already out there as a demonstration to show people what's possible.
If I could pop in once more, maybe. Scott headed the sector group in developing the action plan that dealt with promoting and protecting sequestration, natural landscape sequestration capacities. And since you're talking about species lists, one of the and I worked with Scott on that, and one of the things that's popped up in my head is that with climate change, a lot of species that have been native for a long time are no longer going to be probably adapted to Albemarle County. Austin Kane, who I think is at Virginia Tech now, but was I think at National Wildlife Federation, the biodiversity plan cites her paper, which has a lot of computer modeling of expected range shifts of native tree species in Virginia. And one thing that, because we want to work on some of our forests on our farm in the county, one of the questions that keeps facing me is, well, what tree species does one plant to both promote biodiversity, protect, in other words, ecosystem function, but at the same time will continue to grow and survive in the face of climate change? And one of the things that strikes me, both for biodiversity protection and the newly adapted climate action plan, is if the county, maybe with help from forestry, and I know Kim has been with forestry, if somebody could develop a list of trees that would be suitable for planting in the county by landowners to both promote biodiversity and ongoing or new capacity for carbon sequestration in the county.
Yeah, that's a good idea, and that's something that'll come up as we slip into it, and I'll talk about this more with Objective 8.
Okay, great.
Yeah, Scott, can I add something real quick?
Sure, yeah.
So this doesn't, I agree, that's a great idea, and I like it very much, and not working on anything like that right this minute, but that with this plant list for site plans that Scott is referring to, we have been making an effort to look at those species that are more southern species, or edge range species rather, that may not be well suited, and a lot of those we are actually taking off the list of recommended plants. I know.
Well, thank you.
And then another one with some recent progress is Strategy 4J here, which is increasing community awareness of the importance of biodiversity. Just another example of that. Our Natural Heritage Committee has recently, this is something they've done in the past, but they've recently formalized the fact that they have a education subcommittee, and that group is working with Parks and Rec, Blue Ridge Prism, which is a invasive plants group, and Places 29 Hydraulic Community Advisory Committee to design some educational materials for Charlotte Hugbrist Park, which I think is a great project that's going to potentially reach a lot of people. That park was a great resource for us when we lived up in that area, and it's a nice public space. So that's a good example of getting information out to the public in a good place. Obtain a position for a county staff member with expertise in conservation biology. That's about making sure we hold on to Kim in the natural resource manager position. And then developing indicators and monitoring data about the state of biodiversity in the county, which is something we're trying to work toward, and keeping up with the land cover data that helps us keep track of that. So that's a long section. That's a lot of strategies and a lot of work to do. But again, that's a really progressive step toward protecting something that a lot of localities don't put a lot of work into, and we really put a lot of effort into recently. Anybody have any questions about that section before I move on? I'll take that as a no. Objective 5 is retain mountain resources. It sounds a little vague, but our mountains are important to the county, both as natural resources, as water protection resources, in the sense that as steep slopes and large systems of steep slopes. They affect our water resources very significantly. They're important cultural areas, of course, and they also are important scenic areas, being visible from all over the place. So we have strategy 5A here, which is continue to protect the mountain resources identified in the mountain contour list. So you see these colored blobs, not the bluish gray ones, which are the development areas, but the rest of them are base elevation areas above which the ridges are considered of particular importance in the county. And they start over here at the Southwest Mountains and Carter Mountain and all of that at the 700-foot base elevation. And as you work across the county toward the Blue Ridge, the base elevations get a little higher. Here's the Herds Mountain area that Bex mentioned a while ago. And of course, over here's Fox Mountain and the Blue Ridge. Pointing out those areas as being of particular importance for the county when it comes to resource protection in the comp plan.
If I could, since I spent years of my life unsuccessfully trying to more greatly protect our mountains, but it's an interesting theoretical issue of whether a community, a county should develop its mountains and its mountain slopes and leave its valleys and stream beds not developed, or the other way around. And there certainly have been communities that have tried each of those, but we've tended to go along the path of trying to protect our mountains and sources of our streams rather than the focusing solely on the reservoirs at the bottom of the streams. Or anyway, it's just an interesting theoretical difference among different communities. But there were two committees that worked very hard for very small results that show up in the comp plan.
Well, the legislation may have been a small result, but it's a long and interesting history, and there was a lot of work and effort that went into it. But we tried to make the best use of the policy results of that as we can, and trying to, at least with our voluntary conservation efforts, trying to find as many of these areas as we can to protect. And obviously Sally knows this better than I do, but the history of trying to protect our mountain areas is a long and interesting one, and would make a longer presentation than I have time for, but would be well worth the time. It's a really interesting story, but
Yeah.
the main legacy we have of it now is the policy recommendation to protect these areas as best we can, since unfortunately there was no legislative outcome of that. So we also say here, this is continue to protect critical slopes in the rural area, protect slopes of 25% or greater in the development areas, which has been done through a series of updates to the zoning ordinance to designate areas of particular importance for preservation, and then focusing on voluntary measures such as conservation easements, Ag 4 districts, and use value taxation to protect the mountain resources, which we are continuing to do. So objective 6. It's interesting to me that objective 6 is an entirely separate objective on its own. The objective 1 was let's protect our water. Objective 4 was let's protect our biodiversity, which includes vegetation, including vegetation along the streams. But here we are still at the pretty high level of the objectives, and we have a separate one that says retain and improve land covered near rivers and streams and protect wetlands. This tells me that this is really, really important, because we could have just buried this under some other objective. But, I mentioned before that water protection is important to Albemarle. Wetlands and vegetated stream buffers are really important to Albemarle to a lot of people. And I think that's reflected in the fact that this got pulled up to the level of being its own objective. There's a lot of work to be done in this area, as there is in any community with a large rural area and a long farming history. But I think is something that this community really cares about. So this is kind of a busy slide. One way of reflecting how important this is to us, and Kim is free to jump in here at any point, is how much this affects the work program of the natural resources program that Kim manages. Strategy 6A talks about using all of our existing tools like the Water Protection Ordinance, critical slopes regulation, and other measures to preserve our designated river and stream valleys in their natural state, protect significant resources associated with those river and stream valleys, and to provide buffer areas. And a while back, while David Hanna was still the natural resource manager, and before Kim came on board, we developed a 7 or 8 point program for the natural resource program the county did. And item 1, shown here in 1A and 1A and 1B, was all about water resource protection and stream buffers. That was the first item and the top priority. So again, this is something that keeps coming to the top of the list for the county. So this has been underway. It's been a lot of time and work has gone into this already. Sorry. The first step in 1A was to work on stream health in the development areas, and several people in the county have already been working on this. It's underway with lots of board work sessions and staff work been put into that, lots of community work, stakeholders being consulted, and ordinance amendments. So, and most recently in July, the board approved a zoning text amendment to expand our erosion protection standards that used to only apply in the steep slopes overlay district, which is just in the development areas countywide. So again, we're trying to expand our water protection measures that apply to erosion control, which is a major factor for our stream health countywide. And now we're moving into another major project that Kim is working on in 1B here, which is the stream health project for the rural areas. And this bottom picture here is the stream health program webpage, which Kim can talk about now or later, but I'll give you the address for that at the end. And this is a big new project that is coming up with a lot of stakeholder input, a lot of county community input, looking for ways to improve stream health across the whole of our rural areas, which is saying something. That's 690 square miles. So it's a big project and one we hope to put a lot of effort into. Kim, do you want to say anything about that, or do we want to say?
Well, just really quick, this is on the natural resources program work items that this little table hasn't been updated, but these are the first work item is still stream health, as Scott mentioned, and we're just shifting to focus on the rural areas now. And the stream health website is still under development, so you may look at it, but just keep in mind that there will be blank spaces, and we're working really hard on filling that in over the next couple of weeks. So there is a page under the stream health. If you go to community development, learn more about stream health. There is a page for the Stream Health Initiative, which is the project that Scott's been talking about. And we'll be continuing to update that with upcoming events and ways to get involved.
Okay, so a few more strategies: protecting wetlands. Again, this is focused back on using the development area master plans to protect streams and wetlands, even in the places where we're doing concentrated development. Objective 7 is an interesting one. It's pretty traditional for a natural resource plan to address hazard planning. Most localities do this. Albemarle is no different. And those of you who have been in the community for a long time will remember this event that this slide refers to in 1995, when we had a very large, very intense storm stall over the national park and caused some very intense debris flows over the North Fork Willamette River. Parts of our county, the western part of our county, are prone to what are known as debris flows, which are fast-moving, slurry-like landslides that are very dangerous, very sudden. I can say very a lot. They're just scary, and they can cause a lot of damage. So that's a part of our hazard planning, is keeping an eye on those areas, trying to keep people out of danger from those. The blue in this map, of course, is floodplain. We have regulations to make sure that development doesn't occur in those areas. So these are just ongoing, very long-term efforts to prevent development in areas of natural hazards where people would be put in danger. So,
Hey, Scott, can I ask a quick question on that?
Sure.
Has the county put in any monitoring stations or thought about working to put some monitoring stations on some of these upper reach streams in the watershed?
not that I know of. Unfortunately, that there was a real intense start to some work on debris flows back in the time when Dave Hirschman and Stephen Bowler were still here, which was obviously quite some time ago, when we were working with USGS on that. And then as the recession set in and we lost a lot of people, that program got cut back. And so I don't think we were able to get that far. Excuse me. So mostly we've been just stuck with educational efforts at the most. It would be great to get back to that. I don't know enough about the PDC's efforts to know if they've been able to do that. That's something I'm hoping to learn more about. In putting this slide together, I realized I just don't know enough about this regional hazard mitigation plan that I'm showing here, and that I need to learn more about it.
I met with Chip yesterday, and the PDC has not done very much, nor are they particularly inclined. They've gotten about $50,000 to work on the required flood hazard plan, but they really think that the Urbana Conservation Alliance probably is better situated to do more of the stream monitoring. It's just something I think we're interested in at PDC, and just wanted to know what you knew, and we should put our heads together.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point, because between other forms of stream monitoring plus the debris flow hazard areas, I think there's a lot of work potentially to be done. That we made some first steps in the early 2000s, and then through funding losses and staff cuts, some things didn't continue that really should have. And this is a particular area that I realized in putting this presentation together that I really need to learn more about myself. Basic flood protection. We have a flood hazard overlay district that we continue to enforce long term. This is a recent flood from, when was this, Kim? 2018, with Holcomb Road that was washed away and cut off a portion of a neighborhood. You can see the emergency solution to keep the pipe in place there. These things are still happening, and we're having to try to keep people safe and enforce the standards to keep these floodplains treated properly. The most recent regional hazard mitigation plan is 2018, so that's due for an update soon. And then finally, Objective 8, which I mentioned at the early on. This again was done back in 2015, so it's a little bit out of date, but fortunately we've sort of surpassed it. This is talking about recognizes recognize is not really an action word. Recognize is a policy word that means we're just accepting something. Recognize changes occurring to the Earth's climate, anticipate and mitigate impacts. Mitigate is a good word. However, the only strategy back then was to develop a community resilience plan. But I think we've gone well beyond the community resilience plan, because just this year, the county has adopted a climate action plan. The phase 1 climate action plan was adopted very recently, and is its own document, a very substantial document. So I will just run briefly through high-level view of what it contains. We've got 5 main focus areas: transportation and land use, which is about, and I would say the first 4 areas are about reducing carbon emissions. So transportation and land use, obviously, there's tons of ways that those things are tied together through reducing vehicle miles, by changing modes of transportation, by making your land use patterns more compact. Those things are just tied in so many ways. With buildings, there's energy use issues in nearly everything we do with buildings. Renewable energy sourcing, obviously, is highly important, and then sustainable materials management. And then the final one, the final topic area, which is, as Tom mentioned, that he worked on, I was in this group, Kim has worked on this, several others. Each of these had a sector team that had county staff, other experts, lots of people from the community that worked on it to help hold the goals together. What's interesting about the last group, the Landscape, Natural Resources, and Agriculture group, is it was less about, not about reducing carbon emissions, but largely about carbon capture, carbon sequestration in the landscape, finding ways to maintain and increase vegetative cover so that we're capturing carbon on the land, protect and restore natural carbon sinks, promoting practices on managed lands that trap carbon and minimize carbon emissions. So all of these areas have a ton of policy recommendations in the plan, in this phase 1 plan. So what is this phased approach? We've got a climate action plan in multiple phases. In phase 1, we engage with stakeholders to develop the goals. In phase 2, we begin implementation and refine the strategy. So you are here, literally, we just finished phase 1. We've got the initial phase of community engagement and developing the action policies down, and we are just now moving into phase 2, which is implementation. It's going to be a big job, especially with the current budget situation due to COVID. But this is a massive policy commitment on the part of the county to change the way it operates and try to help the community as a whole change the way it operates. But that's how that policy item has developed in the 5 years from a single strategy to a much larger document.
This is Tom. If I could comment, I'm really concerned about the lack of progress on a resilience plan, which has been in the comp plan, this chapter, for 5 years now. And the reason is one of the key, and that there are sort of well-developed methodologies now for developing resilience plans. And one of the key sort of basic foundational ingredients in these is to do a kind of analysis of the impacts of new risks, things emerging with climate change, on a wide range of operations of local governments. And one, for example, emergency management is one. It'll affect greatly natural resource planning and protection. And in the biodiversity plan, we actually have a section on resilience planning for biodiversity conservation with climate change. But for example, ag-forestal industries have been for decades and decades a sort of treasured central element of Albemarle County comp plans. And the ag-forestal industries, in my experience in talking to foresters and farmers, for the most part, many of them are very conservative people. They often don't believe in climate change, and they don't really want to get into it very much. And I think that if the county's going to have a good natural resource chapter, it's very hard to do it without launching a climate resilience program soon, and at least getting this kind of general risk analysis to the county of climate change. And I listened to the tape of the board's recent discussion before voting to start the phase 1 climate action plan, and I noticed none of the supervisors that I can remember said a word about climate resilience, although I'm happy. I've talked to Greg Harper with other people about getting climate resilience going, and he seems interested. And he mentioned in this recent last week board meeting that staff anticipated that there would be some kind of movement, and it would involve a large public process. So I just want to say, for all that the county's taken on, there's really this big missing ingredient, namely this cross-the-board risk analysis to the county on climate change. And since climate action, I think Rachel mentioned in the first meeting of this group, was supposed to be this common thread through the entire update, I think to be considered, I think it's going to be very hard to have a good plan unless this risk analysis gets done fairly early in the comp plan update process.
Yeah, and I don't know exactly what that's going to look like. If you note at the very bottom of this phase 1, phase 2 chart that lays out general directions over time, the orange arrows at the bottom are resiliency plan and and revisions to that resiliency plan over the long term. So the people in FES who are laying out the long-term course for this are aware of that need. I can't say I know exactly where the risk analysis portion fits into that resiliency plan, but obviously they've got that as part of their work program. I think we just need to, as we get into phase 2 of the implementation and refinement portion, and as Rachel's group gets into the planning for the overall comp plan revision, then talking about that risk assessment element early on will be a good idea, just to make sure that is taken into account.
Right. Thanks, Scott.
Yep. So other than that, I guess the next thing is ask if anybody has any questions.
Well, I was going to say that a number of us league members went to the various meetings that led up to the plan progress so far, and I think we're impressed with the staff work for each phase of it, and I'm glad to see that community engagement and collaboration continues throughout, but maybe just to assure the staff that we did appreciate being able to have our input along the way.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. It was an impressively large, I have to say, from having been in the middle of it, or a small piece of it, it was an impressively large community input effort. Maybe one of the biggest I've seen in 20 years for the county. It was a big effort, and FES did a great job.
I have a question. I was wondering, what are the two, just name two significant ways that you do outreach education to the community, all of this work that you do? And the reason I ask that question is, I'm thinking in terms of how can the League of Women Voters facilitate any of that?
Yeah, well, that's kind of in transition. Well, I only know about my piece of that, or a piece of it. Kim can probably in some ways answer that better because she's right in the middle of doing a lot of that kind of work. So I can only really speak for the past. That's been a difficult challenge for us because we haven't had as much expertise or staff time on outreach as we have desperately wanted in the past about some of our conservation programs. But I think that's changing a lot right now. Kim, I don't know if you want to add anything, but it seems like we're shifting a lot of that now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the county, we have the Office of Communications and Public Engagement, CAPE, and they're working really hard, and we're working in cooperation with them on a lot of areas to try to explore new ways to reach, different people in different communities and use different tools and methods to engage the public. So, I mean, I can only, again, speak to the things that I'm working on, mostly related to the biodiversity goals and the stream health goals of this. But they do have, with the public input sites, different opportunities for the public to engage. on various initiatives. And so I think that's one of the main things that they're doing. I don't know, Scott, what would you say with respect to the work that you've done?
Well, I mostly just use Rex.
Partnerships, I mean.
Right. Partnerships, yeah. For the land conservation programs, we do mailings and outreach and things. And literally, I was joking a little bit, but with partnerships like relying on PEC and specifically Rex to help get the word out about our land conservation programs. We really do rely on that a lot because we haven't had the capacity to do it ourselves. And frankly, there are a lot of our community partners are really skilled at it with PEC, preventive conservation. There are a lot of organizations out there that are, sorry, cat rampage, working at home has its hazards.
Is the
There are a lot of I'm sorry?
Is the Soil and Water Conservation District still active?
Oh yeah. They're working a huge amount with landowners, but of course they have their own programs. They're not, well, except for ACAP, which is relatively recent, which Ken can talk about. They're mostly working on their own programs and not ours.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah,
would say those partnerships are really valuable to us as well, and having capacity of the county, particularly these days, as an easement holder. And Scott is the staff person for the Albemarle County Easement Authority that more and more has become the go-to easement holder in Albemarle County for a number of reasons. And we would not be getting the amount of land conservation done in Albemarle County that we're getting done without the county's creation of that entity. One of the things that I worry about is the county's continued investment in that entity as far as making sure that there's adequate staff time for stewardship and monitoring defensive easements. So it's a place where I intend to continue to advocate. I think others on the board of the Albemarle County Easement Authority also intend to advocate for helping make sure that continues to be a really robust program to hold a lot of easements, a lot of very important protected easements. And it has been a good partnership. I just want to stress that we can all continue to advocate for the Board of Supervisors to invest in making sure that that's a strong program.
I've been concerned about the education aspect also. I guess reaching people who have no particular interest in natural resources to begin with. And that's probably a large, well, in Charlottesville, maybe not so much as in other places, but, a large portion of the population. And I was thinking about the fact that so much of the educational material, if you're looking for it, is fantastic. It's really been done well. But if you're not looking for it, how do you get to reach people who are not interested or invested? Invested might be a better word, because things do happen to them and then they get interested. But how do you reach them now? And I have been thinking that groups like the Climate Change Collaborative, trying to actually get people to actively do something where they'll then begin to learn more and seek more information might help. And I guess basically, I'm thinking about whether there's ways that the county could approach, and I think, Kim, you were suggesting, that you're looking for new ways to educate people. And I guess the thing that I have been for years and years asking is, does anyone ever check to see the effect of the education, follow the introduction of new methods and see whether it has actually achieved the goal of educating parts of the.
But that's a whole field on its own. I know people who have master's degrees and PhDs and trying to figure that out in environmental education. But Kim, I don't know if you want to say something about the NHC's education group and what they're hoping to do.
Yeah, I can talk to that. And I mean, before I get onto that, I was just going to say that I think the county is kind of grappling with some of these questions right now with CAPE, the Communications and Public Engagement Department, and also what we call OI, is the Office of Equity and Inclusion. And they're trying to figure out ways to reach different groups and different communities in different parts of the county. With the Stream Health Initiative project, we are having a lot of discussions about that right now of, how to reach people in the rural areas, especially, who may not already be engaged in seeking this information, especially in the time of COVID, where folks in the rural areas may not be as well connected digitally in some cases. And so, there's a lot of ideas being floated around, but if anyone has suggestions on that, I think we're all open to it as well. But a couple of things that have been considered are, popping up in country stores or places where people are. And the fact that a lot of people are using our county parks. I mean, they have had some of the highest visitation that they've ever had, maybe ever, in this time, with people who don't normally visit county parks, and just opportunities there for disseminating information and resources and directing people to some of our public input sites and places they can get information. So so those really good questions, and I think that folks at the county are really interested in developing some of these ideas and open to any that others might bring. So there's that. And then the Natural Heritage Committee, like Scott mentioned, has formed this education subcommittee. And one of the goals of, I think it's also in the comp plan, but it's in the biodiversity action plan, is managing resources in county parks. And so I've been working really hard on developing relationships with county parks, staff from county parks and rec, and looking at ways we can do education projects there, and also maybe stewardship projects and stewardship demonstration sites. And so the Natural Heritage Committee is also interested in, a post-COVID time of maybe organizing volunteers and groups to do stewardship projects out there in county parks. So that's one way we're working with them as well, and trying to move forward some of the education piece.
I would just like to add that I think that during this time of the COVID, more and more people are accessing the natural resources around here because of social distancing. And I think that it's a key time to start reaching out to those people to say, to make them aware. It hadn't been on their radar before. It's on their radar now. And I'm happy to hear that you were talking about being in touch with community recreational areas and being able to put educational materials at those sites. I know that Dardentown Park has a interesting, huge bulletin board with a lot of really good information on it, and along the different river trails on either side of the Rivanna have some interesting educational review boards for the community, and I was just wondering how we can add to that or help with that. Thank you.
Yeah, and Parks and Rec has done a great job of putting out interpretive materials in different places. So I think like the next phase of connecting with some of these other initiatives, like the Climate Action Plan, where maybe they're not putting out information about that necessarily, and some of the, the stream health project that we're working on, we can look forward to trying to do that. And also Scott briefly mentioned that Charlotte Humphreys Park project, and it's, that's a really small park. And from a natural resources perspective, it's probably less important. It's only 22 acres and it's in a very urban area, but it is a good example of a place where the county can potentially reach different types of people who are just, out for a walk with their dog or something,
Exactly.
and are not necessarily attempting to actively engage in natural resources conversations. So
Exactly. That's kind of what I was thinking. Hmm.
I have another question on a different topic if we're finished that, but it's similar. I was really impressed by, as Scott mentioned before, how long so many of these, particularly water-related projects, have been going on, and just the amount, the numbers of ordinances that have, or projects and some ordinances that have been created. And I guess I started to wonder, first of all, whether there's enough staff to follow this stuff and stick with it, because there's just so much, and it is also important. So and then I started thinking about, does some of this need to be actually written into the plans? For example, I'm thinking of things like the stream channel remediation work that's being done, and the particularly for stormwater runoff. These minor adjustments, which are very necessary to stop the erosion, have been occurring around the county. Is there some way that someone is required to go back and check these periodically to see whether they're actually working? In other words, to keep track of all this stuff that has been done so well, but to make sure it's actually working. It just seems to me that the amount of checking on situations and then figuring out what to do about it if there's a change, it's mind-boggling. As I was reading through the plan, I'm just wondering, is that written in? Is it in people's job descriptions? But this is what you have to do. How does all this stuff get followed?
That's a really good question. And for the facilities that are owned and managed by the county, that it certainly is part of somebody's job description. I don't really know the answer to how that's done for the private facilities. I'll talk to our engineering staff who would know that and find out how that works. I'd kind of like to know the answer myself. Let me see what I can find out.
I have a question. I'm wondering how much partnership there is with UVA's of environmental studies departments in terms of helping with community outreach and education. Does any of that exist?
a good question. Not that I'm aware of. Scott, do you know of any partnerships with UVA Environmental Studies?
Not on that topic. I mean, when the Biodiversity Work Group and the Natural Heritage Committee first started many years ago, there were a lot of UVA faculty involved in doing the work in those groups. But that was more in the policy development area. It wasn't really the outreach area. I'm not aware that we've ever had UVA involved in the outreach portion. The county has really increased its own ability in the outreach area in the last 5+ years. So we've got a lot more capacity than we used to have, not in our Department of Community Development, but in the county executive's office. So um, we're more able to do that now than we used to be, although we could always use more people.
Mhm.
And it's always a challenge. You know, for example, when we've got a big program like Kim's Stream Health Project, then we can get some time from Kate. But I don't have time in my work plan or somebody else in community development to do the conservation easement outreach that I depend on Rex and other partners to do. There's always, more needs.
And if I can comment, one of the things that's really different now, at least on some of the issues, if you go back into the 90s when some of us were trying to sell people on the idea of the county getting into biodiversity. I mean, some people would ask, what is biodiversity? Many people did, actually. Even we had Board of Supervisor members saying, so what is biodiversity? And then when you explained it, a lot of people thought, oh, this is just tree hugging. And then you had to really explain and educate on how, no, we're talking about functioning of ecosystems which provide us with clean air, et cetera, et cetera. Nowadays, and I think it was really evident in the enormous turnout for these climate action meetings, in the last 2 years of turnout of the public, people understand that, we're dealing with much more serious, quote, existential, end quote, threats. And I think on some issues anyway, it's much easier to get people to react and say, maybe I better think about doing something on this front. I should do my part, not just, recycle Coke cans or something like that.
I was going to add on the topic of University of Virginia, they have groups and programs, and they're so proud of their sustainability efforts. I get quite a number of things by email by belonging to different just email interest groups, and they seem to be very interested in spreading the word. It's sort of self-congratulatory sometimes, but it educates along the way as to, oh, I didn't know that was important, and look at all the time and effort they're spending on that kind of reaction. So I would hope the county is working with or keeping in touch with what the university is doing along those lines. It's not necessarily the academic department of the natural resources or ecology, but like if Darden Graduate Business School is doing something that they send out to their alumni. There's just a lot of time and effort being spent on communication that it didn't until just now occur to me that the county probably isn't, but could very easily connect with those efforts and further spread the word. I think the university would be glad to have the word spread further, particularly when they're bragging about something. So anyway, that's something for probably the communications department at the county, rather than you all exactly, but somebody ought to make that connection.
Yeah,
If I could comment, I often go to this the Seville 100 meetings. It's a climate action group, it's a group of groups from around the city and the county, and UVA regularly has a representative there talking about their programs, and every month there's a chance for every group to talk about what they're doing and their interests, and it's a fabulous way to exchange information. And Greg Harper actually participates now in those meetings every month. So there is a lot of, on climate action, there is a whole lot of back and forth with the county that way. And I'll throw out, Sally mentioned UVA, I guess it was 2019, Resilient Virginia, which is a statewide organization, but the head of it, the director, Annette Oso, lives in Albemarle County, and she persuaded Darden to host this enormous conference that went on for a couple of days and was fabulously attended. We had people from UVA and all sorts of other organizations give papers on health risks to climate change and natural resource risks. Sean Tubbs gave a paper there. And it was a terrific example of sort of a state-level private organization symbiosing with UVA, the Darden School, and a whole lot of other groups to hold this sort of community event where there was a huge amount of information exchanged. And I think it would be fabulous, if more broadly sort of it might be possible, I don't know why not, to have some kinds of events possibly at UVA on natural resource issues as we go down the road here, although it takes an awful lot of organizational effort, which Annette spent a lot of time doing. But anyway, I throw it out as this is second Sally. There really are possibilities, at least on some of these issues, to interact with UVA. And as Scott mentioned, we had about 5 faculty members on the original work group, and then early on the Natural Heritage Committee, which was very helpful to kind of launching a lot of good policy directions.
I would say we're also trying to get better at a little bit of creative, appropriate bragging of our own and promotion of these programs, which is it's a challenge because we're strapped for the staff time to get the work done. We're trying to find ways, and this is kind of something I've been tasked with doing, is finding ways to use some new technology to quickly and efficiently make people more aware of the work we're doing. Rex mentions the increasing work we're doing with our conservation easement program in the county. A lot of people are telling me, Scott, people have no idea about this program. You're doing this work, nobody's ever heard of it, and that's probably a fair assessment. We have what is by acreage the largest local government-run conservation easement program in the state of Virginia, probably operating with the smallest amount of staff for an easement program in the state of Virginia, unfortunately. But nobody really knows we're there, so including a lot of local decision makers. So it's just something we need to get better at telling people about, like a lot of our other programs, and we're trying to figure out ways to do that with the staff time that we have through using story maps and a lot of the recent Esri technologies to get that out in front of people without having professional, dedicated promotion staff to do that.
It's also one of the most impactful ways that the county staff is implementing many of these goals laid out in the comp plan. So there's very few staff resources being put into it, and it's actually one of the more successful programs that the county has for implementing the goals of the comp plan, in my opinion. But maybe I'm biased.
Well, I'm biased too, but there's a lot of these policies, we're trying to manage the impacts of things that have negative impacts, but these conservation easement programs and Ag 4 district things are positives. They're positive conservation change. And we're seeing, we've got just, the county as a whole has over 100,000 acres in conservation easements. 25,000 acres of those are in the county's conservation easement program. That's a lot. That's a lot of responsibility. It's a lot of work to take care of, but it's also a big conservation gain. It's a great program and something that people ought to know more about. And the more they know about it, we'll get even more. But then we need to have the people to make it work.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've been in several conversations lately about, with respect to outreach, but also implementation of a lot of these plans and programs, is just, that overlap in the objectives and what they call the co-benefits of these programs. So, if we're talking about climate and we're protecting large blocks of, forests through a conservation easement, that's a lot of carbon sequestration, and that's going to protect stream health. And so I think given that we have this limited capacity, we're exploring lots of different ways to both achieve those goals simultaneously, but also, explain them and explain these programs and their benefits using those programs and the overlap that exists among them.
Tim and I recently, as the final draft of the climate action plan was coming together, we had to do the final edits on the recommendations for that landscape and natural resources section. And I remember we spent a lot of time trying to really push forward the stuff that had multiple benefits. We had 10,000 ideas to work with from a lot of good people, but it was the things that did more than one thing for us, that did carbon sequestration and habitat protection and water quality protection, that really seemed like the highest priorities.
I had a question about what kind of legislative liaison the Piedmont Environmental Council may have, like with the Board of Supervisors, or projects that may require some state funding. Do you have an active agenda in terms of how you're approaching the Board of Supervisors for some of the things that you mentioned?
I don't know that I would say an active agenda. I would say it's more on more sort of on a case by case basis as we advocate for certain issues and programs. So for example, I mentioned the need for increased funding for the easement authority. We will be trying to make a bit more of a concentrated effort on that because it has grown so dramatically, and it is such an important part of really us being able to achieve our goals for rural conservation in Albemarle County, and I believe for the county, and it has kind of flown under the radar screen. So, I'm kind of waiting, and I want to do that in partnership with the board of the easement authority so that I'm not kind of getting out ahead of their desires as well, and I want to kind of see that led to some extent from within, as opposed to just being a voice in the wilderness. And I would say often that's what we try to do, is build community support for certain issues and then help get community members speak. So, if I or Chris Hawk, show up to speak to the Board of Supervisors, they kind of expect that we're the usual suspects. While that needs to happen, just like all of these other advocacy organizations, the most effective way to, in my view, to highlight what we believe the priorities to be in terms of funding with the Board of Supervisors and the City Council is to get members of the community to show up. So it's not just the suspects. And I think, for example, on bike ped advocacy, which is something that we've, trying to build a better urban area, if you will, as we have focused on that, getting more members of the community to voice the desire to see that with the Board of Supervisors and with community leaders has made a bigger difference than, me just showing up and saying, you need to be putting more money into this.
Thank you.
So I have a question for you, kind of following on that explanation from Rex. Is when as I'm kind of coming into this role, when do you expect the public comment period and county workshops to start for the new update to the comprehensive plan?
That is a Rachel question, and I'm not sure. She had to step out for a second. I'm not sure she's still on the call or not, but I can get her to answer that. I do not know, but Rachel will definitely know. So I'll get her to respond to you on that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
I guess while we're asking PEC about their legislative agenda, it used to be that hardly anyone came to observe the Board of Supervisors meetings, and the League of Women Voters had an observers corps that would try to be there. Now, they wouldn't speak up, they would take notes, but they would be there, and that sometimes was the only public in the audience. And then the Chamber of Commerce and developers and home builders hired a lobbyist, and so there's always someone in the audience to speak up for private property rights, and very forcefully and flexibly. I mean, he doesn't have to go back to his board to find out whether he could say something. And then that was countered by PEC having a person whose job it was to be in those meetings, not just for a particular topic, but to keep an eye out and be willing to jump in and speak up for the natural resources and the community interests countering sometimes the private property interests. Is PEC going to continue that? Because I've got to say the League of Women Voters Observer Corps went the way of many volunteer efforts some years ago, and so the League isn't there. Is PEC going to be there?
Yes, and that's something that I will be doing.
That's
in
Chris's
my
job.
Right. Well, that's what I'm asking for.
Yeah, 100%, Sally. We totally agree that being, I say physically present, and I mean that. As soon as we are allowed to be physically present again, being virtually present for the time being, but even better, physically present when we can be. That is a vital role, and having a PEC staff person that is present and following the process at the city and county level is what I think that we believe here in the Charlottesville office a core function of the organization, and one that we need to continue, as you say, Sally, to be there to be able to continue to advocate for our natural resources, for the implementation of this and other relevant sections of the comp plan. And yes, 100%, that will be primarily Chris Hawk's role in Albemarle County.
Good. Welcome, Chris. You'll have fun.
Thank you. Well, it will be a bit of a switch for me. I'm coming from Madison and Culpeper, as well as Orange, so I will be vocal when necessary.
All right, I guess, are there any more questions or comments about today's discussion?
Good meeting.
Thank you very much, Scott, particularly for putting it together.
Thank you.
Thank you all, Kim and Scott. Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much for taking the time to put this presentation together, and for presenting it to us. It's, once again, we've really learned a tremendous amount, and we appreciate you doing this.
And I would just say thanks to the League for organizing this. This is a great opportunity. Perfect timing to get Chris kind of connected, Chris Hawk on our staff connected, and see some people, hear from Scott, hear from Kim, learn a little bit more about this section. I think this type of activity is a really great idea, and would love to see a further round where we make something like this available to the public at large and try to get dozens, I envision hundreds, I doubt that will ever happen, of people from the general citizenry better educated. And I think the county has done a good job of this with these community advisory committees that Emily Kilroy at the county actually started years ago. They have been really helpful in getting more citizens engaged, at least in the urban areas, on planning issues. And those have been really effective. And I see this as a forum to do some of the same. So thank you all for putting this together.
Yeah, thank you for having us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, it struck me going through this chapter was how each of the sections was the favorite topic of some group or individuals, and it's very valuable to see it all put together in one chapter because there are interrelationships, but the people who are really concerned about one area of the natural resources seldom thinks about how they're connected to these other areas. So once again, thank you to the staff for putting it to us today.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a unique forum right now, so I thank the League and everybody else for helping to make it happen.
Yeah, I think one of the things that struck us too when we were starting to do this was the whole book club format idea. was forcing us to actually read the entire plan. Mostly we just jump in on something that we're interested in right now. And so we'd love to somehow see the concept passed on to other groups so that there can be various small book clubs going through this comprehensive plan, and there are so many others. The city is so important, you know, keeping up with that, trying to figure out what kind of input would be required for them to finally finish up their plan. So I don't know if you can think of ways that other groups might get interested in going through comprehensive plans and other planning documents that are available. It would really be, I think, a good idea.
Okay, I'm going to leave and say thank you to everybody.
Right. Yeah, I think it's
Nice to meet you all.
time.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Yeah.
you all for coming.
Thanks, everyone.